Welcome to this Vendredi Rouge, where we're going to be talking about the situation in the United States. And our speaker is going to be Ethan Earle, who lives at the moment in Paris, but was previously in New York, where he worked with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. He's living in Paris. He's teaching international politics in a number of places, including the Paris Institute of the University of London. And he writes out his publications, probably the one that most of you might know about, even if you, depending on your English, is Jacobin magazine. And he was a very active member of the Democratic Socialists of America, the main left force, the main socialist organization in the United States. And he's still an active member of DSA here in Europe. He's one of the people responsible for their international committee. And he's going to talk to us now about what's been happening and what's likely to happen. And I was just saying to him before the meeting started, we thought back in the beginning of December when we invited him that it would be interesting to have his take on the elections and some idea of what a Biden presidency might look like. And we didn't really realize all the things that were going to happen in between times, which are complicated things. So he's going to talk about what has happened and give us some ideas on what's likely to happen, what a Biden presidency is likely to be, and what the DSA is going to do in that context. So over to you, Earle and Ethan.
All right, thanks, Murray. Thanks for the introduction. And I'm happy to be here tonight. Je veux remercier tous les francophones qui sont ici ce soir. Je vais donner mon discours en anglais. En tant que représentant de DSA, je suis plus confortable en parlant anglais, mais de toute façon, on peut parler un petit mélange d'anglais et français après dans les questions. Et je veux aussi remercier au traducteur et lui dire que je vais parler lentement. So with all of that said, again, thanks to all of you for being here. My name is Ethan Earle. I have worked for a long time with the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. I have also done a bit of work with the Party of the European Left and with the Left Caucus in Brussels. I'm also a longtime member of DSA and the Democratic Socialists of America, and currently a member of its international secretariat. I've been one of the chief people responsible for international relations for DSA over the last couple of years. So tonight I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes. It's important for me that we have space for a larger conversation. So I'm looking forward to also opening up the circle after I'm finished with my remarks and seeing what else you all have to ask about. As Murray said, a lot has happened since Murray and since lénke asked me to speak here. And so there are different directions that I could go with this talk. I'm going to try to touch on a lot of things very quickly to then create space for all of you to let me know what your questions are. So a couple of days ago, as all of you are well aware, President Joe Biden was sworn in. His opening speech at the inaugurational ceremony included many calls for decency, for reaching across the aisle. But these calls were also married to explicit appeals for racial justice, for climate justice, and for fighting the far right. The day after, yesterday, I think, time has moved at a strange pace over the last few days, but I think it was just yesterday. He issued 17 executive orders I will not give all of them to you here, but to name a few, we saw a notable strengthening of COVID regulations, including a national mask mandate on federal property, a number of measures related to immigration, particularly a strengthening of DACA, which provides a pathway to citizenship for folks, undocumented people who were brought to the United States as children. He revoked Trump's exclusion of non-citizens from the census count. He ended Trump's so-called Muslim ban, and he halted construction on Trump's border wall between the United States and Mexico. Elsewhere, we saw a revocation of the Keystone XL pipeline permit, a federal moratorium on evictions, a pause on federal student loan payments through September of this year, and more broadly internationally, a reinstatement of ties to the World Health Organization, a moratorium on oil and natural gas leases in the Arctic, and a re-entering of the Paris Accords. Just since then, and I'm really now speaking in the last day, there are three, I think, things that are really worth noting for all of you. One is the firing of Peter Robb, who was the general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board. Peter Robb was one of the principal ideological opponents of the labor movement, broadly speaking, in the Trump administration. And this was a major demand of the labor movement, had been for a long time. It was only the second time that a general counsel had been fired this quickly since World War II. Secondly, we saw a call for a review of US economic sanctions and how they might hinder COVID relief. And thirdly, we saw just very recently a few economic measures, including a call to raise the minimum wage for federal workers to $15 an hour, while providing expanded collective bargaining rights and also providing food relief for the poorest people in the United States. So this has been a pretty good last day or so from a progressive perspective, whatever one thinks of Joe Biden and this current administration. Moving on from there, something that was very clear over the last couple of days is that we did not see the far right protests and threats materialize in the way that was feared. Of course, we have to go back 2 weeks and look at the storming of the Capitol as an important moment in US history in a lot of ways. And there it was uncovered that there were all sorts of plans to disrupt the inauguration, the days around it. There were plans for all of the 50 state capitals, as a matter of fact. Those threats have not materialized to this point. Instead, we saw Trump, we happily saw Trump get on a plane and leave Washington, D.C. ahead of the inauguration. And we have not heard much from his entourage or from the broader sort of far-right movements circling in his orbit over these last couple of days. So this is a good thing, and I will come back to this aggrieved army of Trump supporters towards my conclusion. But I think it's worth saying that after really that there being a lot of concern about a broader conspiracy or a broader attempt to stop this transition, we have seen US liberal democratic institutions just about hold up this time around. So the response of the broader left in the United States has been a bit of on the one hand, on the other, not surprisingly. We've seen on the one hand, folks who are claiming that this marks a restoration of the neoliberal elite rule that essentially made Trumpism possible. And on the other, we've seen folks who say, no, this is actually a restoration of a modicum of human decency and technical competency to the White House, and it gives us on the left a target to pressure for progressive reform. And I'll return to this as well in a moment, but just to give you all a little bit of a spoiler, I think that there's a certain truth in each of these positions. So now I'm going to speak to you for just a moment with my DSA hat on. As I've already said, I am one of the people responsible for international relations at DSA. The Democratic Socialists of America is not a political party, certainly as it would be understood in the European context. It is a political organization that maintains one foot firmly rooted in electoral political struggle and one firmly outside of electoral political struggle. DSA, I believe when I sent a month or so ago, I said that we had 85,000 members when I was writing with Sebastian and Murray. Today we have 91,000 members. So we're growing and growing and growing as part of a strategy to reach 100,000 members. We have 91,000 members. It is a membership organization. It is run by its members. It is run by dues-paying members through conventions, through democratic processes. And it is the largest socialist organization in the United States since the very early part of the 20th century. As many of you probably know, we supported Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary. That is a position that we feel very good about, stand by. We also, as an organization, democratically, at our convention, decided not to endorse any candidate other than Bernie Sanders in the general election. So we did not issue an endorsement for Biden, but many of our members, of course, were out there in the streets and in meeting rooms fighting against Donald Trump, fighting against what he represented, and fighting to get rid of him. For DSA, the recent election was a good one. And I refer here not just to the fact of getting rid of Donald Trump, but also to a number of victories at all levels of US government, from local state representatives to increasing a real socialist presence in cities from New York to Chicago, to the re-election of our two most well-known members, who are Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib, and to the election of two new DSA members to the US Congress, who are Cori Bush, a Black Lives Matter activist from just outside of Ferguson, Missouri, and Jamal Bowman, a well-known community figure, principal, head of school from the Bronx in the district that just borders AOC's district. In terms of what DSA is going towards now at this moment, we can signal a number of our campaigns, which have been important over the last period, particularly pushing the new administration for Medicare for all, particularly in this moment of a pandemic, of such a broad health crisis, to push for student debt relief, to push for some version of a Green New Deal, perhaps in the version of a jobs program, which has been increasingly voiced just in recent days, as we're seeing Marty Walsh likely picked as the new labor secretary for the Biden administration. and a broad campaign, which is taking place mostly at the state level, to tax the rich. So to find ways to level higher taxes on the richest people in the United States. So I would say that my analysis of the current conjuncture, which I've already hinted at, is that there are reasons for optimism, actually, regarding the current Biden administration, and reasons for concern. And there are reasons for optimism regarding the recent defeat of Donald Trump and Trumpism in the United States. And there are also reasons for concern. I'm going to sort of, looking at these reasons for optimism and concern, filter them through recent election results, through what happened in November. And I'm going to talk specifically about 4 results. In terms of a reason for optimism, I'm going to point to a proposal, a proposition in Arizona that was won. Arizona, as you know, might know, is a historically conservative and right-leaning state that moved a bit to the left in this most recent election. And there was a proposition which would effectively level a substantial tax on people whose income is greater than $250,000 annually. So we're talking about a very small percentage of the population, and would then use this money to pay for reinvestment into the public sector, into schools and hospitals and the like. Particularly in a state that does not have a progressive reputation, I think this was a major victory. More importantly, I would point back 2 years to the series of strikes and other forms of labor action that came out of the teacher movement in the United States. There was a wide-scale action in Arizona against ongoing austerity and budget cuts against education. And there was a notable victory that was won there by the teachers' unions in Arizona. And it's the same movement that then carried forward into passing this proposition in Arizona. So I think that what we see here is action that is taking place in our labor movements, in many ways taking place in the streets. Most of these strikes were, in one way or another, wildcat strikes. They were strikes that weren't formally authorized by the national union, but were only later supported by the national union. And then seeing the way that this momentum is carried forward into action at the electoral level, at the legislative level, towards the implementation of proposals that are consistently seen as favorable by a majority of people in the United States, including relatively strong support from Republicans. Moving on sort of towards the concerns, we saw the victory of a prop in California that classifies Uber workers and Lyft workers as independent contractors and not as full employees of Uber or of Lyft. So this is a progressive state. You all know that California has a reputation as being a left-wing state. And we saw there the first major salvo to essentially create a new precariat, or to crystallize, or rather, crystallize isn't the right word, I would say rather codify the precarization of a huge swath of workers in a rapidly expanding industry, which then touches on all sorts of other industries around food delivery, things that are more and more important, particularly during this pandemic. So again, this is something that happened in a progressive state. And I think that we see here sort of battle lines being drawn within the Democratic majority around what a progressive and forward-looking policy is as relates to labor, as relates to working people in the United States. Continuing with the concerns and moving over to the Trump side of things, I would say that, very, very simply, 74 million people voted for Donald Trump in this election. That's 12 million more people than voted for him 4 years ago. So we have now an expanded actual base supporting an aggrieved politician who has been, telling people that they can inject themselves with bleach to cure themselves of COVID, who is, well, you all know, I think as much as I do about Donald Trump right now, but so did these people, and we had 12 million more people vote for him in 2020 than voted for him in 2016. And many of these folks do not recognize the legitimacy of the election. So in Europe, I know that there is a long history with the problems of revanchism and with a large aggrieved people who feel that a great injustice has been done to them, and where that can lead. And certainly that's a concern in the United States right now. These people are not going away. They are not disappearing. To turn that on its head just a little bit and try to find bits and pieces of optimism, I'm going to turn to Florida. And there in Florida, Trump did win the vote narrowly. But at the same time, a $15 an hour minimum wage was passed. And this has been a long-standing call of progressive movements, a $15 minimum wage in Florida. It required a supermajority in Florida, over 60%. So what we're looking at here is between the 52% or so who voted for Trump and the 60%, 60+% who voted for the raise in the minimum wage, we see a very clear sliver of the Trump base who is in favor of progressive action to support the multiracial working class of the United States. Make no mistake that $15 an hour is a multiracial working class demand, particularly in an incredibly multiracial state like Florida. So these are people who quite straightforwardly believe that Trump represents a better option for the working classes in the United States. And the reason that I say that this is a positive is that it provides us with a very clear roadmap around how to win back a segment of that base of 74 million people who recently voted for Trump. Of course, we are not going to engage in QAnon conspiracy theorism, and we are not going to give any space to the unrepentant racists that also make up a part of that base, to the fascists and neo-fascists who also make up a part of that base, to the uber capitalists who also make up a part of that base. But it's a very instructive way of understanding that what we have also is a certain segment of the population who believes that they have been completely left behind by the Democratic Party, that working class interests are not represented by the Democratic Party. And these people can be won back, and they have to be fought over. So I take this as a positive. In conclusion, and sorry, I've got a young puppy in the background that is it's feeding hour. It's kind of crazy puppy hour. But I would say that the broader left, again, and this includes DSA, but it includes other organizations like the Sunrise Movement, like Justice Democrats. It includes the Black Lives Matter movement, and I could go on, is going to be crucial in securing the most favorable outcomes both as regards to Biden and also as regards to Trump. When we're talking about Trump, I think that we do need to create a cordon sanitaire around the fascist or neo-fascist wing of his movement. But at the same time, if we want to stop not just Trump, but also Trumpism, we do need to look at the ways in which a segment of the working class has been left behind, not just by Republicans, but also by Democrats, and where to go from there, how to speak clearly to those people without in any way giving in on questions of protections of minorities. And then I would say in terms of Biden, that the role of the left is to hold him to account, to ensure that he maintains and develops all of the progressive promises that he has made, that pushes him to be better where he fails, and that also acknowledges good things that he does, even if we might argue that they're insufficient. So here, I would say that, returning to these executive orders that I talked about at the beginning of my intervention, that these were good. I am happy, and there are a lot of folks out there in the United States who need this a whole lot more than I do. If we look at undocumented folks living in the United States, people who've been living in fear during the Trump administration, these are very good things that he has done for them. And so we should applaud that, and then also continue to use that momentum to talk about ongoing contradictions in the Democratic Party and the weaknesses of the Democratic Party. And yes, the role and responsibility of not just the Democratic Party, but of other establishment institutions in giving rise to Trumpism. And how can we change those institutions to better speak to a new majority of progressive Americans who both hold up a defense and support for minority rights, and also a strong and robust approach to our working classes in the midst of this pandemic and beyond it. So those are my comments for now. There's a lot of things I touched on and a lot of things I didn't touch on. As Marie said, a lot happened over this last couple of weeks and months, but I'm really happy to sort of open up the conversation and spend the next 20 or 30 minutes with all of you, just hearing your own thoughts and giving you the best answers that I can. So I appreciate you listening and looking forward to more.